Welcome to the Women in Business and Finance interview series. This is a series which is co-hosted by Center for Financial Markets and Policy, Georgetown Women in Business, and McDonough Women together in the honor of Women's History Month. In this series, we are interviewing Georgetown alums about their careers and experiences as a women in finance and business. Today, both Emma and I are really excited to chat with you and hear about your journey as a woman in the financial industry. So, just to get started, briefly, could you tell us a bit about your career path and what led you to your current role?
Yeah, so I'm currently at PayPal. I've been with PayPal for 9 years. I am the North America Small Business Strategy Lead. I decided to join PayPal after working briefly in financial advisory. So I worked in investment banking at Citigroup for 2 years after getting my MBA from McDonough. And I realized pretty early on that financial advisory wasn't for me. And I decided to kind of pursue opportunities working as an operator. I worked in nonprofit before business school, and I wanted to kind of have that more concrete, operational background. So I applied for a role at PayPal. I joined in kind of a general strategy and operations role, working in a strategy and operations role focused on supporting the go-to-market launch of a kind of a series of new experiences that PayPal is rolling out for in-store payments. And it was a great opportunity. I, worked very cross-functionally with our sales, product, marketing teams, and had a lot of exposure to kind of the basics of going to market, if you will. And over time had kind of switched into a number of roles out of that. I worked in market development. I worked in business operations. I worked in marketing for a brief point in time. And then have now kind of come back into this general SMB strategy role where our team is focused on being an advocate for our small business customer. We work cross-functionally with our sales, marketing, and product teams to really deliver on what we call growth strategies for the customer segment. We oversee the performance of the segment. We set priorities for the segment. We're kind of the overall general managers, if you will, of the small business segment.
Awesome. That's so interesting. It was great to hear a bit more about your background. So our next question for you is, what are the most encouraging parts of your work and what do you love the most?
Yeah, so I've been with PayPal for a while now, and I think what keeps me here are a couple of things. One is our company's mission. We are focused on democratizing financial services and making the movement and management of money secure, affordable, and available to all. And so that's a huge draw for me. I also really love working with the small business customer segment. Small businesses are really the lifeline of our economy. And, it's always inspiring to work for such a kind of a driven group of businesses that are, that are super inspiring. And then lastly, I would say, I really like the role that I'm in. It's a cross-functional role. So I get exposure to a variety of different functions. I work pretty closely with our sales and marketing team. And although I'm not a subject matter expert, I am a generalist by design. I'm able to work on developing programs and campaigns with sales and marketing, working with our product teams, working with our pricing teams. So I kind of get this 360 view of the business and get to kind of have my hands involved in a bunch of different things.
Oh, that's really amazing, Bridgit. And personally, I could relate it to because that's something I have done pre-MBA and something that I'm focusing on as well. And especially in the fintech space, when you're working to grow, smaller businesses, that's really a fruitful and satisfying thing at the end of the day. So we would really want to understand, in what manners do you believe that women can support other women in a business setting? Any thoughts and advices on mentoring, women in businesses?
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't know that this is a women-specific response I'm going to give, but I think when it comes to the colleagues that I've developed close relationships with, I think it's important to develop a network of people that you trust at your company, right? Either people that you're working directly with or people that are that are kind of like adjacent to the things that you're working on. And, when, as a good colleague, what you should always do is really celebrate and elevate people in public forums. So if someone's doing great work, you applaud them, you recognize them. And I think that goes for women as well. I think also it's important that we are, as good colleagues who have each other's back. I have a group of people that we try to share, we give advice to one another. We are transparent about compensation and how we should think about comp and advocate for ourselves. We help each other, overcome obstacles. So I think it's just really important to develop networks, strong networks of people in order to kind of have that support when you need it. In terms of mentorship specifically, I have been in formal programs where I'm a mentor, and I've also been a mentee in formal programs. And I always find these formal programs to be really awkward and forced, to be completely honest with you. I think that the best mentors I've had have really been informal. There are people that I've worked with, managers that I admire, who I'm able to go to get advice and support when I need it. But they've always been really informal. And I think you pursue good relationships. So people that have been there before you, it's always a great idea to kind of to go to them for advice. And I try to be available to people in my network as well who may need support.
Yeah, I love what you said about informal mentorship, because I agree those formal mentorship programs can often be very awkward, but it's really great to have people who you can, like, as you said, be available and you can rely on to talk to about different things. So kind of bouncing off of that, what do you think are some of the challenges that women in your industry face, and what advice would you give to overcome those challenges?
Yeah, so this is another interesting question, because I'm going to respond as Bridgit, as both a woman and a woman of color, the things that I've seen in my journey. I think a challenge is being seen as someone who is credible and someone of authority. How you overcome that is and I'm still learning how to overcome this, to be completely honest with you. I think that I tend to overcompensate and make sure that I have all my facts together, that I'm buttoned up and polished when I can. I don't necessarily even know if that's a healthy thing, but that's the way that I pursue it. Is I have my facts and I use my voice and I advocate. So that's one. Another, I think, challenge is, I think there's this feedback is really important for your development. It's also really important for your promotions. It's really important for you to excel. You need to get feedback from your managers, from your colleagues, from your peers. And I think that women of color specifically oftentimes have a hard time getting that honest feedback that they need to help them develop. And so that has been a challenge in my career. I tend to pursue managers and colleagues that give it to me, like that give me that feedback honest. Like the best managers I have are managers who have been just very honest without me having to advocate for that feedback. But again, the way to overcome that is to ask and hope that you get the honest feedback that you need for your development. Doesn't always happen, but you can all use your voice and ask, right? And then I think one of the other challenges that I faced is really finding an advocate and sponsor, because that's the way, we've all heard those terms before, that's the way that your career can progress, is when you have someone that's advocating and sponsoring you. Again, still trying to figure this out myself, but the ways that I think I've overcome it is really by like networking and showcasing what I've worked on. So talking with senior leaders at the company, making sure they know who I am, what I've worked on, and over time, those relationships hopefully become advocates. Those people become advocates and sponsors.
Wow, that was a really amazing response, and I could personally relate to it in terms of understanding, how to ask for a direct feedback when you don't really get it. So yes. I could, totally relate to that. So moving to our next set of segment, like we would want to understand what is a piece of advice that you would want to give to undergraduate and MBA women who are soon entering the business world?
Yeah, so I think it's important I've been at PayPal for 9 years. So I'm saying this, take this with a grain of salt. I think it's important to explore. And especially out of undergrad. Out of undergrad, I definitely had so many different jobs and things that I did before going to business school. And even post-business school, even though I've been at PayPal for 9 years, I've had many different roles within PayPal. I think it's important to explore as much as you possibly can and figure out what makes sense for you and what you excel at. And there are going to be times where you're not going to perform or do well. I mean, there are definitely certain roles I've had where that weren't for me. Like marketing is something I've tried, and I'm not a great performance marketer. And I had to learn that by doing it. So I would definitely say just explore as much as you can. I also think it's important to really, so cliche, but like find good leaders to work for, because find good leaders to work for and don't chase the shiny objects, right? Like whatever that may be, look for good scope of work, look for a great leader, a great team, because that's where you're really going to have the opportunity to grow and to be challenged, and also possibly to even shine yourself as well and develop a really great reputation in the things that you're doing. So I definitely would say that. And also something I'm learning right now is along your career, there are going to be people that are your peers that are going to be doing better than you in terms of title, in terms of compensation. And it's going to be very tempting to kind of pursue the ideal standard of success. And I would say just figure out what is important to you first and foremost, and be confident in that and stick with that, because that's going to really guide you. And it's going to be the most rewarding, most fulfilling for you long-term, versus jumping around and chasing what people define as success. Define what success is for you and be confident in that, what that means.
Yeah, that's great advice, especially as an undergrad woman myself who's going to go into the industry. So I'm curious to know how you manage the grueling demands of your work with your personal life and your own hobbies, and how important is the work-life balance in the financial sector where work hours tend to be higher than in many other industries?
Yeah, so, just very honestly, I don't work in investment banking anymore, so I can be very honest about this. There was no work-life balance. Like there just wasn't. Not in a way that was like rewarding, at least at the time. I'm guessing the industry has changed a bit since I was in it, but there wasn't that for me. So it was a struggle. At PayPal and in tech, I find that my peers who work in tech have a lot more work-life balance, especially with the larger tech companies, maybe not necessarily a startup. But at PayPal, I appreciate the fact that we have a culture that kind of respects work-life balance, and that isn't an issue, something that I have to like really work towards, fighting for. It's something that has actually been really easy just because it's a part of the culture of the company. We don't work weekends. Usually we're not working super long hours unless it's incredibly important or there's an urgent deliverable, but generally speaking, we have that balance.
Wow, and totally like working with tech space and tech, industry and other businesses in the tech. I can say that the work-life balance is predominantly existing there compared to, a lot of other industries such as consulting and investment banking. And as a woman, that can be, challenging, while especially if you have a family and kids, that can be a different aspect as altogether. So, in the honor of Women's History Month, we would want to, understand a bit about how did you find your supporters at your current company, PayPal, as a woman. And as you mentioned previously also, that it's both working with your peers as well as senior leadership to be really vocal about what you have achieved and how you want to go ahead. So, what are few things that you would specifically want to highlight in that context?
In terms of how I found my advocates and sponsors, generally speaking?
Yeah.
Most of the advocates and sponsors I have are people that I formerly worked with, who were leaders on teams that I formerly was working for. And because they've seen my work, I think they became an advocate and sponsor because of the work that they've seen. I think in a lot of those cases, I also developed like a kind of a better relationship with them, like through one-on-one conversations and regularly meeting up with them and asking them for career advice informally. So you kind of develop that, they kind of have a buy into your own success because of the advice that they're giving you. They want to see you be successful. It definitely doesn't happen overnight though, by any means. Like it maybe for some people it can happen overnight, but for me, it's been just investing in relationships over time organically, and people being advocates for me. In that case, like it all comes down to people I've worked for, doing good work, and then developing the relationship.
Yeah, that's definitely great advice. I think that's something that like I'll definitely have to obviously work on over the course of my career. So next, we see that fintech is obviously growing constantly. So how do you think women will play a role in this growth, and like what role do you see women like playing?
That's a really great question. I think that there are probably problems that women face related to, and I can speak for financial services. There are probably unique challenges a lot of women face in financial services that female professionals are best to address as an opportunity. And so that's kind of one role that I think that women can play, is just being able to better understand the end customer, the needs of women when it comes to financial services and access to capital and access to finance, because we know historically women and minorities have challenges getting access to capital. So that's one way that I think women can help women, if you will, in this space. It's a really good question. I need to think about this one a bit more. I've not really thought fully what else, what we can do beyond being showing up in the spaces that are innovative, right? Making sure that there's a seat at the table for us in every single fintech category, and that we're represented and that we are helping to drive, success in the various companies and spaces we work in.
Thank you. And I totally, can say that when women are there for being very vocal for each other and supporting in terms of fintech industry, especially it's a new segment that's coming up and growing at an exponential scale across the world. I think we can definitely have a table for each other at that space and, keep on supporting each other. So, in the time that we have remaining, do you have any additional advices, lessons that you learn to impart on women navigating through the business world? And, we would want to also understand how your courses and curriculums, which is, I understand it's been so long since you last were in academics, but, we would want to understand and hear about your experiences in the academics while you were here.
Yeah. Last parting words really are just understand the power of your voice. I think sometimes I tend to be someone who's just generally reserved naturally. And I find that that can be a disadvantage in some spaces. And so it's important to be really your own advocate in everything, whether that's promotion, whether that's getting feedback from peers or from, your managers. Just again, use your voice, be an advocate. Be self-promoting at times, unfortunately. Showcase your work and what you're doing as much as you possibly can. In terms of courses that helped me along this journey, I was in business school, I was so hyper-focused on recruiting for investment banking that I pretty much solely participated in like finance-related courses, electives, if you will. And I think in retrospect, and I also recruited solely with investment banks and big banks. I think in retrospect, it would have been fantastic to explore other electives, marketing, for example, any of the marketing electives that were available. And I think it would have been beneficial to also try interviewing and recruiting with non-banks, just for that exposure. Because I definitely wish that when I was transitioning from investment banking into the this more tech space as an operator. I think that, I think that it would have been helpful to just have those, connections with other companies, extend my network beyond finance at the time, just to make sure that I had options when I was leaving.
Great. Thank you so much. And I totally, will say that I think business school is the place where we can experiment, learn, and then, pivot. And yeah, I mean, I was also focused a bit on more of consulting. And then I realized, like, why just this? This is the only time I would ever get to experiment with my professional, focus that I want to pivot after B school.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a really interesting insight. And thank you so much for taking out time to chat with us.